Hi, I'm Rachel with Patterns and Pixels Canada, and on today's video, I'll be working on week 5 of my Winter Mystery Quilt from Threads That Bind. Let's get started. It is finally time to start week 5 of my Winter Mystery Quilt. But first, let's take a look at what I have created so far. Week 1 was 2 different blocks, so that was the first one, and that was the second one. Week 2 was strip sets. So I still have one strip set that hasn't been trimmed, but the other 2 that I had created during week 2, I've trimmed according to instructions that were in following weeks. I can't remember the numbers now. Week 3 was creating this block, and it did leave me with a few extras. I don't know whether or not those will end up being used in the quilt or if they are just extras. I would prefer not to have them left as orphan blocks, so I might, if they're not used in the front, I might use them in the backing. We'll see. And then last week, in week 4, I created these blocks. So far, they're my favorite because it was the first time that I had ever created flying geese, which I enjoyed. If you haven't seen any of these videos, that's fine. I will link to them in the description below. But now it's time to find out what week 5 is. Okay, so obviously more fabric. And then something shaped like a Y. I think. There might be 2 things in here. All right, let's find out what that is. Okay, so I'll put that aside for a moment. We have the medium blue in a fairly narrow strip, and then quite a big stack of the white, but none of the light blue. Okay, now I have a number of these things. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that I am not an experienced quilter. I'm kind of making things up as I go along. And I have seen these before, but I don't know what they're for. Are they tweezers? No, you do something with the spool of thread, right? Doesn't it, like, you keep the spool and the bobbin together somehow? Okay, I'm gonna watch a quick YouTube video to see what these things are for. I think they look kind of like little people. We could make a little scene of people. If you're an experienced quilter and you're watching this, you're not allowed to make fun of me for not knowing what these things are. They look very odd. I'm sure they're little toys, aren't they? For children to play with. Okay. This week, I am creating corner triangles. So it looks like I'm just making a bunch of squares where the corners will be blue. Ah, I need some of the light fabric. 20 of the light blue and white half square triangles made in week 1. So I will need light blue. Okay, made in week 1. Do we have extras from week 1? Who remembers? So medium blue cut into squares. White cut into rectangles. 20 light blue and white half square triangles made in week 1. Ah, okay. I need these that I made in week 1. They also want me to do some more cutting of the strip sets. Okay, so I'm magically going to be combining these 3 pieces of fabric to create block 5 that has sort of blue facing towards the center and white facing out somehow. I think I'll start by getting these 2 bits of fabric cut and watching a YouTube video for these to see what they're for. And I'll get back to you. I'm ready to talk to you about the next step now that I've finished all of my trimming. But before I do that, I want to tell you what I have learned about these devices. So there was a little Googling that happened. They are apparently thread bobbin holders or bobbin clips, not tweezers like I first thought. And they're designed to keep your bobbin and this spool of thread that you're using together, which is very different from the system that I'm currently using, which is in my cupboard back here. I'll show you both of these in just a moment, but the system that I use, Ziploc bags, which works. It keeps my spool of thread and my bobbin together, but apparently this isn't the fashionable way to do things. So your bobbin's meant to go on this first. Now, I did try this prior to turning on the camera, and I wasn't holding on to it very well, and I managed to shoot my bobbin across the sewing palace, which was, you know, fine. I could deal with that. But then all the cats went running after it as well. So hold on to your bobbin when you're doing this. Pinch your, not tweezers, together, and put through the, see, this is where the holding on to it comes in handy. Force it through the hole. All right. And now you have that. And it's not going to move because the bottom is wider than the hole. Then what you can do is take your spool of thread that matches your bobbin, pinch again, poke it through the hole. This time it's not going to come all the way through. It's not that long, but it keeps your spool of thread and your bobbin all matched together. And then you don't have to use Ziploc bags. So now I can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 of my spools and their bobbins together because I have these nifty bobbin clips. In terms of what I have been using, if you've watched my previous videos, you know that I used to live in a very teeny tiny little flat in England. And so space was at a premium. And I chose to use these containers because they were stackable and I could like tuck them into different places around my flat. I didn't have a sewing room. I had a kitchen table. And so all of my resources had to fit around the house somewhere. These containers are really useful boxes. That's not just my opinion, it's the name brand of them. And they are what I use to contain my threads. While I was living in England, I did visit both the Knit and Stitch Show and the Birmingham Quilt Festival. And at one of these locations, I cannot remember which, I was able to purchase, I don't know if I can get it out. Nope. Okay, in here, let me do it like this, is, right, there's a wooden board in here, and the wooden board has all of these little wooden dowels poking through it that have all of my threads standing on. I haven't been able to find the same product here in Canada. I even tried to search for it on UK sites, but I can't remember what store I bought it from, and I can't remember what it's called. But I like it. I enjoy using this particular device. I know when I look at sewing rooms online, usually on Pinterest, they all look very pretty, and a lot of people have their threads on like pegboards. I guess this is kind of like a pegboard, but it fits in a container. They have their threads on pegboards that hang on the wall, or maybe on the side of their sewing table. First of all, my sewing table is a dining room table, so it has no sides. And I do not want to put my threads on the wall for two reasons. Yes, I know my walls right now are bare, but I do have various forms of artwork that will be going up there once I have unpacked them from the move, which is why the walls are currently bare. I haven't opened the boxes yet. I also do not want to put my threads on the wall because we are in a room that has quite a few windows. I know you can only see the one here, but that side of the room has a lot. And so I don't want any of my threads to fade in the sun, and I don't want any of them to accumulate dust. I would rather leave them in some sort of container inside my cabinets. And so these containers work really well for that purpose. I do have a lot of thread in here. I don't use most of it. With my quilting, I tend to use something in the cream color. The other threads I have in here are from my dressmaking days, where I needed top stitching thread that matched what I was making, which is why I've got so many different colors, but they don't get a lot of use. These little guys, since I have them, I will have them just sit in this container. This container doesn't have the wooden frame base pegboard because while I was living in England, I only had the one container and I only needed the one pegboard, so I only bought the one. This other container has developed over time, but I'm now in Canada, and like I say, I can't find the same one that I bought before. So these little guys are just going to sit in here. At some point, I'll go through and switch out all of my plastic bags to match up with my bobbin clips so that I can be fancy. I have to wonder though, and maybe somebody watching this knows the answer, is there now something that like holds all of these together? Because I wouldn't be able to, I think it's too tall now. Yeah, well not only is it too tall, because the clip is inside the spool, I can't even put it down all the way. So now what do I do? Do I just leave it standing? It's gonna fall over in there, which is fun. But I feel like do I hang it, maybe? What's the next step? Is there another level of storage? I don't know. Okay, now that that's done, the next step in the weekly mystery challenge, Winter Mystery Challenge, is to take the squares I made in week 1, the half square triangles, and the medium blue squares I have just cut to make corner triangles. I've already gone through and drawn diagonal lines on the back of all of these squares using the pen that they gave me in, I think it was in week 1. I think it was the first sort of gift that we received. Reading the instructions, it looks like kind of how you would sew almost anything. You pop it on the blue side, and then they do want me to sew along. It says sew on the line, but then right beside it, it says hint, sewing one needle width towards the outer corner will ensure an accurate unit after squaring. So I'll keep that in mind as I do this. So I'll stitch along that corner line, which means when I can open it up, I'm then going to have sort of a half square triangle that has the medium blue and then like a strip of the light blue and then the white. And that's kind of it. It looks like I'm taking those blocks and putting them together to make block 5, which must mean that these whites are going to be used somewhere else. I haven't read that far in the pattern yet. I'm going to do this step. There's 20 of these. I'm going to do this. I'll press them. I'll square them. And then I'll see if I'm doing anything with these or if they are getting saved for another week. There we have all of the squares made with the white, the light blue, and the medium blue. While it was easy to stitch, and I would say definitely important that you stitch this line 1 needle width away from the line that you draw, it did still make it very close when I came to squaring it up. These squares had started out being 3.5, and then once these were stitched on, I was asked to square them to 3.5. Basically, the sizes didn't change. So you would want to be very careful that you don't accidentally make it too small for when you're doing your work. Now that I've got them all done, I can put them together to make block 5, and they would like them to look like so. And I will make 5 of these blocks. Once that's finished and I've labeled them and set them aside, I can then find out what I'm doing with the white strips that I've trimmed. And I also have, from trimming those, a large stack of triangles, which obviously I will be saving for something at some point later. I have no idea what, but as fellow quilters know, we can never get rid of any scrap fabric. So I'll need to think of something to do with these. I don't want this to be the sort of thing that 20 years from now I still have these. I would prefer to do something with them sooner than that. So we'll have to think of something. All right, let's make these blocks. There is block 5, all sewn and ready to go. I'll get those labeled and set them aside. They stitch together quite nicely. I'm fairly pleased with how my points have lined up. And I did my fanning seam again. I've described that in more detail in some of my other videos, my other weeks. So if you'd like to see how I did this center, just pop back and check out those other videos. And then it allows for these seams to sort of twirl around the block. Now, while these all meet the 6.5 dimensions, they only just do it. And there was even some sides that I didn't trim down because they were so close, something like this, where, let's move this out of the way. There's just a little bit, let me see if I can darken that. There we go. Where it's not, I didn't trim there, I didn't cut it, so it's not straight. I'm hoping that gets sort of buried in the seam allowance when I sew these blocks to other ones. I think if I were to do this one again, I would have sewn with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance rather than a full, just because it was so close and so tight, but that's fine. This one will work. And like I say, I'm hoping that any little indiscretions get buried into the seam allowances. Now, the next step is finding out what they want us to do with the larger rectangles that we cut. They're asking for us to get strip set B units, which I sewed in week 2 and then trimmed in another week, I can't remember now. Strip set B. So they want strip set B to be in the center of 2 of these. Press the seam allowances, square the blocks, label the 6 blocks B. So I need to make 6 that look like this. I'm just going to keep that all together so I don't have a problem. And then they also want a further 6 that use strip set
C. And I'll be doing the same thing with white on either side. And another 6 of those. So 6 of these blocks. And 6 of these ones. All of them squared to 6.5 inches. And then that'll be the blocks for this week finished. I realize my white is very bright. Let me see if I can not blind you quite so much. There we go. That looks a little bit better. And I don't know if I've shown you before. The white here has a texture to it, but I think my camera is just struggling to pick it up. Let's see. Oh, well, there we go. That's a little bit better. So it's not just a solid white. There's a little bit of a texture to it, a tone on tone. Anyway, let's get all of these blocks stitched up and ready to go. As you saw earlier, I have block 5 finished, ready to be labeled and added into my bag with the other blocks I have already completed. And then I've taken the strips that they asked for to create a further 2 blocks, which will be labeled block B and block C, because I used strip set B to make this one and strip set C to make this one. On a whole, I'm happy with how these ones have turned out. The only downside to this particular block is all of these were made with the strips of fabric that they had provided to us. I obviously can't show you those anymore because they've been sewn, but I do still have strip set A. And I'm anticipating having the same problem with this one that I had with these ones. This strip set is 6.5 inches wide, which is the same as what I had for B and C. I then, earlier in this video, cut the strips of white fabric that are on the sides so that they were also 6.5, actually they came 6.5 inches wide, and then I cut them into 3-inch strips. The block in this state is supposed to also be 6.5 inches, which means I had no room for error. Now, you would assume that if I'm taking a 6.5-inch length of fabric and sewing it to a 6.5-inch length of fabric, everything would be fine. But you know what happens when you assume. Which means a few of my blocks, this one actually doesn't look too bad. This one's lined up quite nicely. But I do have a few that, I don't know, stretched when they went through the machine, or maybe the center block with the blue pieces wasn't exactly 6.5 inches. I'm trying to find one that's quite off, as it were. It has meant that all of my blocks are fairly close to 6.5 inches, but I wouldn't say, this one's quite bad. I wouldn't say they're perfect, where I've got something that doesn't line up quite nicely. Again, as with these ones, where they were also a bit tight on the 6.5 inches, I'm hopeful that any discrepancies will be buried in the seam allowances once I find out exactly what it is I'm doing with these blocks. When I get to that point, I'll sort of do like a test first, and if I find that it's just not going to work, it's not going to fit, then I'll be creative. And I may have to add a strip of sashing or something, and then trim it down to 6.5 inches. But until I know what I'm doing with these blocks, I will leave them as they are. This was week 5, and this project goes up to 8 weeks. So we're a little over halfway there. I'm excited. Other than, a couple of difficulties with this one, the blocks that I've made so far are visually quite interesting. I'm assuming that they're going to be put together in some sort of random pattern to make a quilt. I'm also assuming that when I get to week 8 and I'm putting everything together, that I might not necessarily follow the plans that they give me. We'll have to see. If you have enjoyed watching the video that I've made today and you'd like to see others that I'm working on, remember to hit that like, subscribe, and bell notification. Bye.